The Manhattan night sky glittered like a velvet sheet scattered with diamonds. But inside the Waldorf his Torai hotel? The stars were earthbound and they weren't there to twinkle. The ballroom radiated opulence, golden chandeliers dripping light, velvet curtains drawn like theater drapes around a stage built for declarations, not pleasantries. The air pulsed with money, power, and secrets. Billionaires toasted vintage champagne with hollow grins. Prime ministers leaned in close, whispering between bites of foie gras. Laughter was measured. Smiles were weapons. Every glance a chess move. This wasn't just a conference. It was a spectacle, the kind where alliances are forged in shadows and futures decided in whispers. And then, silence. He entered. Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State, emerged from the wings like an actor on opening night. Tailored navy suit. Impeccably pressed shirt. Posture like steel. He moved with the calm certainty of a man who knew every camera was watching and didn't care. No, he counted on it. He took the podium. The room held its breath. Click. Flash. Phones rose in unison like a chorus of mechanical eyes. Rubio smiled, not wide, not warm. Just enough. Like a blade sliding from its sheath. Tonight, he began, voice smooth as polished glass, we reaffirm America's leadership in shaping the global economic future. We do not chase trends. We set the standard. Polite applause followed. Thin, tepid. The kind that says, we hear you. We're waiting for the punch. He gave it to them. His voice dropped quieter but sharper. Razor sharp. We value stability. But we're not blind to threats. And then the name. Pan-Africanism, he said, slow, deliberate, letting the word hang like smoke in the air, is not a future. It is a fantasy. A dangerous utopia built on resentment, not responsibility. Gasps rippled like a sudden wind through silk. A few heads turned. Some diplomats straightened in their chairs. One aide dropped their wine glass, no one even looked. Rubio went on. Ibrahim Traoré, he said, staring directly into the camera lens, is no reformer. He's a revolutionary chasing shadows. His speeches stir emotion, yes, but emotion without architecture is chaos. There is no blueprint in Burkina Faso. Only slogans. The room split in two. Applause cautious, fragmented. Some clapped with forced enthusiasm. Others sat in frozen silence, eyes darting, minds racing. Rubio didn't flinch. He didn't blink. From the wings, his senior advisor Stephen Henderson gave the slightest nod. Rubio stepped down like a man who had delivered judgment, not an opinion. As he exited into a cloud of congratulatory hands and whispered praise, he felt certain a message had been sent. But 4,700 miles away, that message had already found its mark. In Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, the air was thick with night heat. The city buzzed softly outside the presidential compound, but inside, silence. A single screen glowed in a darkened office. President Ibrahim Traoré sat still, bathed in cold light, Rubio's face frozen mid-sentence. Every word had been translated. Every pause analyzed. The moment his name was spoken aloud, that cutting tone, the dismissive edge, replayed like a drumbeat. He didn't move. No scowl. No clenched fist. No theatrical fury. But his stillness was volcanic. His eyes, sharp, hard, didn't blink. They burned. In the corner stood Nicole Coleman, closest advisor, closest witness. She said nothing. She didn't need to. She knew that silence. She'd seen it before. A quiet before thunder. And then he rose. Slowly. No flourish. Just presence. Nicole stepped out of the room, phone already to her ear. Her voice barely above a whisper. Get the comms team. Now. He's ready. Back in New York, Rubio walked tall, handshakes stacking like poker chips. The room buzzed with curated admiration. The message was out. Let the world chew on it. But across the ocean, the world was not chewing. It was sharpening. In a back office of the presidential palace, no gold, no marble, just dust, old fans, and resolve. Traoré sat again. Alone. The screen still glowed. Rubio still talked. But the president wasn't watching anymore. He was listening. To the wind shifting. To history calling. This isn't about insults, he finally said. His voice barely carried. It's about who gets to define our future. Nicole, now seated across from him, placed a folder on the desk. Global reactions are pouring in, she said. Some are outraged. Others cautious. But everyone's watching. He met her gaze. His own calm but molten beneath. Then let's give them something worth watching. Within minutes, the presidential compound pulsed with movement. Lights flickered on. Young communications operatives, lean, alert, multilingual, rushed in like first responders. There was no panic. Only precision. This wasn't chaos. It was strategy. Traoré sat among them, sleeves rolled, notebook open, pen flying across the page. A war room without bullets. No fluff, he said. No victimhood. We don't cry louder. We speak clearer. Heads nodded. The energy in the room surged. Meanwhile, in Washington, Stephen Henderson offered a brief update. African media was reacting. The usual noise, he said. Rubio nodded, adjusting his cufflinks with a smug flick of the wrist. Let them talk, he muttered. But they weren't just talking. They were preparing to answer. And this time, the answer wouldn't come in whispers. It would arrive like thunder. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just preparing a reply. He was about to rewrite the script. Midnight cloaked Ouagadougou in silence, but the palace was alive, electric. Under the moon's cold gaze, a single lamp burned bright over the president's desk. Scattered across the surface were pages upon pages of handwritten notes, scratched through lines, circled phrases, arrows connecting ideas like constellations across time. This wasn't a speech. This was an invocation. A summoning of every voice history tried to bury. Nicole stood close, eyes flicking from draft to draft. She pointed to a single sentence, its ink layered from being written, crossed out, rewritten, again and again. This one, she asked gently. Traoré exhaled. It's close, he said. But it's not enough to sound wise. It needs to bruise the soul. She nodded. No argument. They weren't crafting words for applause. They were writing for legacy, for the blood memory of a continent too long spoken about and too rarely spoken to. By the time Washington stirred, its skyline blinking under morning light, Marco Rubio was already gone. Another stop, another handshake, another photo op. He stood grinning beside European ministers, cut a ribbon at a tech conference, tossed off lines about unity in an uncertain world. To him, last night's speech was old news. A stone skipped across a pond. But across the Atlantic, the ripples were becoming waves. In the heart of Ouagadougou, the palace hadn't slept. Fluorescent lights bathed the media operations room in a ghostly glow. Digital maps pulsed on wall-mounted screens. Staff tapped feverishly at keyboards, tracking social sentiment in real time. Pins dropped across Africa, Nairobi, Lagos, Accra, Kinshasa, each one flashing with rising energy. Inside his private office, Traoré walked barefoot, pen still in hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled, collar open, sweat beading at his temples. Every few steps he stopped, scribbled something, whispered it under his breath like a spell, then shook his head and crossed it out. This isn't about rebuttal, he murmured. It's about remembrance. I want them to hear their ancestors in my voice. Nicole orchestrated the chaos like a conductor, shouting syntax tweaks, refining metaphors, slicing away any word that didn't strike clean. The room was tense but focused, not frantic, but surgical. And outside, Africa was already awake. Social media exploded. Hashtags blazed through the ether. Hashtag African dignity. Hashtag truth echoes. Hashtag stand with Traoré. Influencers posted. Celebrities weighed in. Scholars wrote thread after thread. Some called Rubio's speech colonial cosplay. Others said it had accidentally birthed a reckoning. In D.C., Stephen Henderson stared at the trending charts, jaw tight. People are quoting Traoré and he hasn't said a damn word yet. Rubio didn't even look up. We don't govern by hashtags. But hashtags weren't the point. This wasn't politics anymore. This was identity. Dusk returned to Burkina Faso and with it silence. The palace's old media room had been transformed. No flashy backdrops. No choreographed press event. Just a desk. A single flag. A microphone. A nation watching. Traoré sat, hands steady. No teleprompter. Only ink-stained notes in his own hand. The team gave him the signal. He began. A quiet voice. Steady. But every syllable landed like a drumbeat on dry earth. He never said Rubio's name. He didn't have to. Instead, he spoke of erased languages and looted stories. Of drums silenced and masks hidden in foreign museums. Of a continent told it must develop as if it had not already given the world civilization. He said, Africa is not a question mark in someone else's sentence. We are the authors. We are the ink. And then the line. If the truth frightens the oppressor, let him hide from our words. The camera didn't cut. The room didn't move. Just silence, pure, potent, absolute. The kind that follows when something deeply true is said and everyone knows it. The video was uploaded within minutes. Within an hour, it caught fire. By sunrise, it was translated into 42 languages. Watched, rewatched, shared, whispered. It didn't go viral. It went immortal. Headlines screamed from every continent. Traoré delivers global wake-up call. A speech for the century. Africa answers and the world listens. Even those who bristled at his politics had to admit this wasn't a reaction. This was a revelation. In Washington, Rubio watched in silence. His aides hovered anxious. Should we craft a response? He didn't answer. He was still watching. Still listening. And in some quiet, stubborn corner of himself, he knew. He hadn't just tossed a match. He'd lit a wildfire. Across Africa, the ground moved. In Nairobi, vendors scrawled Traoré's words in chalk on street stalls. In Lagos, thousands gathered, waving Burkina Faso flags, chanting, "Africa will speak for itself." In Kinshasa, murals bloomed overnight, paintings of leaders past and present, joined by Traoré at the center, fire behind his eyes. Even in the diaspora in Paris, London, Brussels, something cracked open. Cafes, classrooms, barbershops, churches. Everywhere, people nodded, spoke, applauded, wept. This wasn't just a man clapping back. This was a people reclaiming voice. At the United Nations, tension thickened like smoke. The Secretary General called a special session. 25 African ambassadors requested the floor. Their message was unified, their tone unflinching. No more apologies. No more polite smiles. No more waiting. They demanded clarity. They demanded respect. And in every word they spoke, Traoré's voice echoed, not behind them, but within them. They weren't asking for sovereignty. They were declaring it. At the United Nations, in editorials on the streets of Dakar and the campuses of DC, a clear message reverberated. Sovereignty is not gifted. It is claimed. And in Washington, the weight of that message had finally reached the upper floors of the State Department. Inside a wood-paneled conference room that usually echoed with bland briefings and muted coffee sips, a different kind of tension brewed. Stephen Henderson slid the latest intelligence report across the table. The pages were slashed with red ink, underlines, annotations, urgent footnotes. Negative sentiment from 31 countries, he said, voice low but heavy. 6 op-eds, domestic. And Senator Jenkins S. asking for a course correction. Rubio didn't look up. He rubbed his temples. The line between his brows was a trench now. He hadn't meant to trigger a cultural revolution. He meant to draw a line in the sand, clean, sharp, unchallenged. Instead, he'd given it color, texture, voice. He'd handed the mic to a continent, and now the world was listening to someone else. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stood calm in the eye of a global storm, but you could feel the wind in his wake. His inbox overflowed, messages of solidarity from across the continent. A direct call from the South African president. A warm conversation with Kenya's foreign minister. A historic, unanimous statement from the African Union honoring not just his words but what they stirred. But Traoré wasn't basking. He was building. This can't just be a viral wave, he told his inner circle. Waves crash. We need something that stands. Nicole Coleman had already anticipated this. CNN, Al Jazeera, France 24, BBC Africa. Interviews were lined up. Not for praise, for momentum. But Traoré wasn't celebrating. He was anchoring. And across the Atlantic, something unexpected stirred. On campuses from Georgetown to Howard to UCLA, student coalitions issued statements condemning Rubio's remarks. Black podcasters dissected the moment like scripture. Parallels were drawn to Nkrumah, to Lumumba, to Mandela. Not just in words, but in feeling. And even inside Rubio's own political circle, hairline cracks began to show. Diplomacy isn't domination, a fellow senator tweeted. Words matter. Rubio's eyes flicked from screen to skyline. Legacy. Control. Ego. Stephen Henderson nudged gently. We can pivot. Reframe. Emphasize economics. De-escalate. Rubio's jaw clenched. No, he muttered. We don't let them rewrite the script. But he was wrong. Traoré wasn't rewriting anything. He was reading from a page that had always existed, one the world refused to see. At the United Nations, history turned in real time. An extraordinary session. Called early. Filled fast. Polished shoes echoed through the marble halls. Nervous aides whispered. Journalists swarmed. But all eyes narrowed to 2 flags, the stars and stripes and the bold red, green, and gold of Burkina Faso. Rubio arrived with tight-lipped aides, his expression carved in stone. The cameras flashed. Reporters called out. He offered no answers. He didn't need to. This wasn't about words anymore. This was salvage. He stepped to the podium, voice smooth, rehearsed. He began with soft diplomacy, mentions of unity, growth, partnerships. A bomb. Then the pivot. Pan-Africanism, he said, tone sharpening, must not become a veil for populist chaos. Leadership must be rooted in governance, not grievance. A few nods. A few claps. But mostly silence. He continued, cautious, controlled, defending realism over revolutionary romanticism. No names. But everyone heard them. Thousands of miles away in a darkened room in Ouagadougou, the speech streamed on every screen. Traoré watched. So did Nicole. So did his closest team. No one moved. When Rubio's voice finally faded, Traoré stood. Fast. Sharp. He paced. One hand on his hip, the other rubbing the ridge between his eyes. He doesn't get it, he muttered. This isn't about slogans. It's about dignity. Nicole stepped closer. Her voice quiet but urgent. You need to answer. Tonight. Before the world forgets what it just saw. But Traoré didn't rush. He knew this next move had to shift the ground. Not just hearts. Permanent, he thought. Not poetic. On TV, analysts pounced. Social feeds lit up. Rubio speaks. Africa waits. Hashtag truth hurts. Hashtag hurt hers. Hashtag proud to be African. Clips cut together, Rubio's caution, Traoré's fire. Juxtaposed, looped, captioned. The contrast couldn't have been starker if it were scripted. And Traoré? He vanished from public view. 4 hours silence. Until, just before midnight, the world heard the whisper of thunder. The president will speak in the morning. But this time it wouldn't be a rebuttal. It would be a proposition. Something no one, least of all Rubio, expected. The dawn rose over Ouagadougou like a held breath. Birdsong scattered across rooftops. Vendors lit charcoal fires. Radios crackled. Phones buzzed. President Ibrahim Traoré is about to speak. Not to answer. To offer. The press room at the palace was packed to the rafters. Journalists shoulder to shoulder. Every lens pointed forward. Anticipation was a physical thing, heavy, hot, charged. No dramatic lighting. No entourage. No podium theatrics. Just Traoré. He walked in wearing a plain beige shirt. Sleeves rolled. A single folder under one arm. Calm as ever. He nodded once to the room. And spoke. For too long, Africa has been told what it needs. What it should want. And who it should thank for its progress, he said, voice steady as stone. Today we turn the page. Then he opened the folder. And unveiled a vision. An African-led development fund financed by a coalition of willing African nations and diaspora partners. Transparent. Accountable. Operated independently of Western financial structures. Designed to support homegrown innovation, climate adaptation, and youth enterprise. A fund for Africa by Africa. No strings. No pity. No permission. A blueprint. A declaration. A beginning. Not backed by foreign banks. Not engineered by international agencies with fine print in invisible ink. Not tied to technical assistance that came with veiled threats and post-imperial strings. This was different. Owned. Governed. Financed by African nations. Fueled by African capital. Focused on African futures. We will no longer accept loans with strings attached, Traoré declared. We will invest in ourselves, in our people, in our land, in our destiny. The press room ignited, flashbulbs bursting like fireworks, keyboards clattering like hail on steel. Even the veterans, the ones who had heard it all, leaned forward. This wasn't a soundbite. This was a structure. This was strategy. This was a rupture in the status quo. Within hours, it began to unfold like a wave cresting fast. Senegal's president endorsed the plan on national television. Ethiopia's finance minister posted a video message, "We are in." Ghana and Nigeria issued joint communiques pledging both capital and coordination. Quiet nods came from across Asia, from Seoul to Mumbai. Private investors, once cautious, now came knocking, not to extract, but to partner. In Washington, the news landed like an unanticipated blow. Marco Rubio sat in a high-security briefing room mid-policy session when the update landed on his desk. He read it once. Then again. No ideology. No emotion. Just logistics. Real money. Real buy-in. Real momentum. His fingers tapped the polished oak of the conference table. This wasn't the fight he'd imagined. This wasn't an ideology to debate. This was infrastructure, and it had legs. The globe was turning, and this time it wasn't rotating around Washington. He called an emergency session. "We need a response," he said, his voice low and flat. Stephen Henderson offered a menu of options, a tempered show of support, a pivot to shared values, or a veiled critique labeling the fund unsustainable. But every path felt brittle. Endorse it? He looked weak. Dismiss it? He looked scared. And silence? That was no longer an option. Across the ocean, Nicole Coleman watched headlines bloom like wildflowers after rain. Africa's counterpunch, independence engineered. No strings, no silence, a fund for the future. The age of listening may have just begun. She didn't smile with glee. She smiled with clarity. This wasn't about winning the news cycle. This was planting a flag in the soil of tomorrow. Rubio made his move. He didn't go to a podium. No flags behind him. No cheering crowd. He booked a primetime sit-down interview on a major U.S. network. His suit was immaculate. His expression carefully measured. He acknowledged the backlash. He didn't apologize. He tried to reframe. Pan-Africanism, he said, when used to unify and uplift, is a beautiful thing. But in the wrong hands, it can divide, destabilize, and distract from the hard work of governance. He called the African-led fund an interesting concept. He welcomed responsible partnerships. But it was clear he was no longer in charge of the narrative. And the world knew it. Social media didn't wait. Hashtag nice try Marco. Hashtag Africa doesn't need permission. Hashtag we are the hard work. A viral video cut Rubio's interview against Traoré's original quote. One man talked of distraction. The other spoke of dignity. The contrast wasn't rhetorical. It was spiritual. On Capitol Hill, the fallout grew louder. Colleagues murmured concerns in hallways and committee rooms. Foreign diplomats from France, Canada, even Britain urged caution and humility. The cables told a different story than the press briefings. The world was watching, and not everyone was clapping for America. But back in Ouagadougou, there was no gloating, no chest beating, only building. Nicole Coleman stepped into the spotlight once again, holding a press conference to lay out the bones and blood of the new fund. No slogans, no grandstanding, just numbers, policy, vision, infrastructure, education, healthcare, digital access, she said, her voice crisp. Audited publicly, managed by African economists, open to ethical investment that respects sovereignty. She looked straight into the camera. We are not asking for permission. We are building our future. The room erupted, not with thunder, but with something deeper, recognition. In the global south, ears perked up. Delegates from Colombia, Sri Lanka, Indonesia all reached out. Curious, inspired. Conversations began, quiet but undeniable. What if we didn't need them either? What if our future didn't come stamped with someone else's flag? Rubio sat alone in his office as the world shifted. The television played in the background. Traoré was speaking to a crowd in Dar es Salaam. He wasn't standing on a platform. He was among them. Children, teachers, local farmers. He wasn't commanding. He was listening. He was present. He was unmistakably leading. Rubio said nothing for a long time. Finally, he turned to Cohen, who had just walked in with another grim update. 3 African nations canceled U.S. aid meetings this week. They cited a strategic realignment of values. Rubio leaned back in his chair, eyes distant, voice quiet. What if we underestimated him? Cohen paused, then answered what Rubio hadn't dared to say aloud. What if we underestimated all of them? Silence followed, the kind that comes not after defeat, but after realization. The ground had shifted, the center had moved, and this time, it wasn't coming back. Weeks had passed since the first spark lit the world stage, but the flame hadn't flickered out. It burned slowly, steady, intentional, controlled not by fury, but by purpose. And in that quiet, focused fire, something deeper began to emerge. The African Development Fund was no longer just a bold idea or trending headline. It was functioning. In rural Ghana, the red earth was turning. New schools taking shape where chalkboards once leaned against broken walls. Across eastern Kenya, teams worked day and night to bury lines of fiber that would connect villages not just to the internet, but to opportunity. In Bamako, a solar training center buzzed with life, built by local hands, funded entirely by African partners. No foreign loans, no policy strings, no gatekeepers, just progress, on African terms. And at the heart of it all stood Ibrahim Traoré, no longer merely the president of one nation, but a statesman whose voice was now shaping conversations in rooms that had long excluded leaders like him. He wasn't asking for space. He was occupying it. He spoke on global panels. He met investors not as a client, but as an equal. He made one message unmistakably clear. Sovereignty begins the moment we stop waiting to be acknowledged. Meanwhile, in Washington, Marco Rubio found himself in unfamiliar territory. He wasn't strategizing. He was reflecting. In the solitude of his office, he asked for speeches, his own from years ago. He asked for transcripts, not of policy briefings, but of African tech founders, student activists, cultural leaders. He wasn't looking for talking points. He was trying to understand what he had overlooked. One night, Stephen Henderson made a quiet suggestion. "Put it on paper," he said. "Not a statement. Something honest." At first, Rubio resisted, but the silence wore him down. Late one night, with a legal pad and half-drunk coffee, he began to write. Not to defend, not to spin, but to confront. 3 days later, the piece appeared in the Washington Post. "What I Got Wrong About Africa," by Senator Marco Rubio. In it, he acknowledged that his framing of Pan-Africanism came from a narrow, inherited perspective, shaped more by historical alliances than modern realities. He didn't reverse course on every concern, but he admitted that dignity, not dominance, must guide international diplomacy going forward. The op-ed drew fierce responses. Some called it brave. Some called it calculated. Others weren't sure what to believe. But in Ouagadougou, Traoré read it from start to finish. He folded the paper and placed it gently on the desk. "He's trying to understand," he said. Nicole, standing nearby, raised a skeptical brow. "Do you trust that?" He paused. "I don't trust declarations. I trust growth. Not pretending you were never wrong, but deciding not to stay that way." That evening, as the sun dipped behind a haze of dust and gold, Traoré addressed a gathering of students, journalists, and village elders in a university courtyard. He didn't arrive with fanfare. He didn't stand above the crowd, he stood among them. His voice, as always, was calm but anchored. "Our mission was never to shame anyone," he said. "Our mission was to remind the world Africa exists not as a burden or a backstory, but as a living force. Our voice isn't a reaction. It's a reality." The crowd responded not with wild cheers, but with something heavier. Respect. Recognition. Resolve. They clapped like people who had waited a long time to be heard and were finally hearing themselves echoed back. Thousands of miles away, Rubio watched the clip. Alone. Silent. And maybe just for a moment, something inside him shifted. Not because he lost, but because he saw clearly that there was no game to win. Sometimes the most powerful moments don't come from dominance. They come from recognition. From understanding. And perhaps next time, the conversation won't begin with a warning. It'll begin with a willingness to listen.